of nice features. To start with, in the status bar, you can go one step after the other, or you can go to the next slide. You have an indicator whether the current sheet is on display fully or not, as long as there is an arrow displayed. There are a couple of things waiting for being shown. And it disappears, as it is now. I know everything on that sheet is on display. And if I press Enter, I will get the next sheet. If I press S, it will toggle the visibility feature of the status bar. If I want to jump to a certain sheet, I get a list, and I can select it and jump to it. And if I want to see the whole document in one go, I press P like print, and it's all on display straight away. Nope, I made a mistake. So how does the definition look like? Well, this is, by the way, another extension I've defined in Markdown. It allows you to specify nothing but key value pairs. What you do with that is a completely different matter. It's just an opportunity to have data associated with the document, and you can do later on with that whatever you like. In this presentation, I use that, as you can see, to define the variables order, company, and date, and I might or might not display them on the sheets later on. That's the way they are actually displayed. The JavaScript requires curly brackets around them, because curly brackets have a special meaning themselves. They have to be a stated backslash character. And that just means that internally it takes the value of order and replaces that variable inside the Markdown. A header of level 2 obviously defines a sheet. And by defining an HTML block with the class handout, you can even assign a certain text in a way that it won't appear in the presentation as such, but when you print it, that will make it into the printout. And that is a nice opportunity to explain why HTML blocks are actually an interesting thing in Markdown. You might consider this to be an HTML block, but you would be wrong. These are actually two HTML blocks with an ordinary paragraph in between. The reason is that the definition requires an HTML block to have two empty lines in front of it. Then the HTML block comes until another empty line is required. So that is the first HTML block, and only that. That, however, is an ordinary Markdown paragraph. And then there's another blank line, another HTML block, and that's the end of it. If I would remove that empty line and that empty line, it would become a single HTML block, and the result would be different because that wouldn't be interpreted anymore as Markdown. It would make it into the final document as 2 stars followed by the word with and another 2 stars. By making it 2 HTML blocks, it becomes an ordinary Markdown paragraph, and it is transferred into the appropriate markup. That's the way the whole presentation looks like. Now let's go through the presentation as such. It's a Dyalog class. It takes a Markdown file as input, and it uses the markable class to convert that into HTML5. And then it creates from that a slideshow we are currently looking at. It just uses HTML5, CSS, and a bit of JavaScript. JavaScript, of course, is needed for interpreting the keystrokes and stuff like that. And it needs a modern browser. You can't use Internet Explorer 6, let alone Netscape Navigator 4, but everything modern it should do. We are going to look at another presentation called example.md, which explains all the possibilities, gives also a good overview about what can be achieved within such a presentation. And finally, there is an exe available. The exe has the advantage that you can move or drag a Markdown file just over the exe, and it will convert it into a presentation by exchanging the extension md against HTML, and that's it. If you use the exe, you don't even need Dyalog APL to be installed on that machine. And you can use in such a presentation everything that is supported by Markdown. The whole range of Markdown markup is available to you. So what are the advantages? It's a single standalone HTML file. There's nothing else required. Of course, that means the CSS and the JavaScript is embedded into that HTML file. Otherwise, that wouldn't work. It's open source. It's simple and easy to use. It even allows you to integrate APL expressions into your presentation and to test those expressions. So you know exactly that what you've defined. It's giving you back the required results. It has disadvantages as well. There are no animations whatsoever other than animated GIFs. So if you require something like Morgan's doing this all the time, replacing a certain bit of a sheet by another thing, you can't do this with present. It's just not possible. So the workflow is simple. You create a presentation by emptying the Markdown file. You drag it on top of presentable.exe, and you get an HTML file, and that's it. There are plenty of shortcuts keyboard shortcuts to do whatever you like, but you can also use the mouse to do that. It's by default switched off, but you can toggle this by pressing N. You can see here. I'm a keyboard guy, so I'm switching off. I prefer the keyboard over the mouse. All elements by default are incremental, meaning that when I press the cursor key, it reveals the next topic. Instead, when I press the cursor, the page down or the enter key, I get the next sheet in one go. I've already mentioned the arrow, which tells you whether the sheet is complete or not. The basic rules is that a header of level 1 defines the name of the slideshow, and headers of level 2 define slides. You can, of course, use further levels, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Whether that is a good idea is a completely different matter. I don't think so. So you should normally stop at level 4 at least. In paragraphs, you have the opportunity to define bold, italic, bold, and italic, and delete it, as well as APL code. Everything between backticks is interpreted as inline APL code. That's how that would look like. So that what is displayed in the gray box would result in what we see above it. You can insert line breaks either by a backslash at the end of the line or by defining the BAA between those brackets. This can be nested, bulleted, as well as numbered. The number is actually only important for the first one. The first one defines the initial value of the list. What follows after that it doesn't matter because it will be renumbered anyway. Code can be inline or blocked. This defines a block of text that looks very different from the inline markup, as you can see. We cannot use, of course, use pre to define an HTML, but I don't see the point of this. The only reason why we want to do this is if you want to have a particular CSS associated with that pre-block. But you can achieve that, as I showed earlier, by assigning either an ID name or a class name to it anyway. So you can integrate images as well, and because you can add a style straight away between the curly brackets, you can position it, you can define the height, you can define the border, whatever. That is the simplest possible table. It has one column and two rows, and that is the result of it. You can use the columns to define the alignment of a column. The column to the left means left aligned, two columns mean centered, and the column on the right side means right aligned. That would be the result in this case. And here we have column headers as well. Blockquotes are defined in exactly the same way as in an email. You put a small lower as in front of it, and that's it. Okay. That's because in my position it looks very different. So that is a famous quote, right? Everybody has that in the room. But you can't be killed for this anymore. It's already dead. I stole this from Roger, I think. 3 hyphens or 3 stars or 3 something else underscores, result in order of the media. Imagine you have this expression, which will calculate the prime numbers in 20, and you want to be sure that you get it right. You can insert the data definition into this slide by saying xp1 gets all the prime numbers in 20, and in another way, you can, you can have a second code block which has not 1 result but 2 results. So for this we would define that xp2 is 10 and 6. With these 2 definitions, we could then check whether the result of the expression would be correct or not by using the execute definition to call the function. This is not exact. It's correct. I corrected it. I forgot that I corrected this. You can't specify it in a relative way. The name of the function has to be fully qualified. So it has to be hash.presentable due to its check slide. Then it will call this function, and it will provide the one at the left, not the right argument, the left argument. The right argument will always be a namespace with the definition of the current presentation. This is how the check function would look like. It gets the namespace of the right argument and the number we've seen at the slide, the one at the left argument. It creates a reference pointing to presentable, and then it gets the code blocks from the HTML, the resulting HTML, and then it would execute that code block, meaning that the expression we've defined in the code block will be executed. It will look into the data thing. That is where we end up with our definition of T-value pairs. And then ideally, the two should be the same. If they are not, something is wrong. We defined our expression to be all the prime numbers in 20. On this sheet, however, we provided 100 at the right argument. So we will get a different result. It won't fit. And as a result, we get checked code blocks, expression 1 and 24. This is not what we expect to get. There is more behind the scenes, and I think that is enough to give you an idea. Finally, I would like to look into Markable itself, to use it in anger. Markable comes with a pretty exhaustive suite of test cases, 230 something. They all pass. Some of them are actually useful to get an idea how they work. How Markable is supposed to work at all. Or monitor. That's better. The test case defines a little bit of Markdown on line 6. Very simple. And what it does is it calls two functions. The first function is init, which requires 2 arguments. The first one is a namespace containing parameters. You don't have to do this if you provide an empty vector, like in this case. It takes defaults. And the second argument is the Markdown as such. That returns a namespace which is populated with a couple of variables useful to make the scanning process and conversion process more efficient. For example, the Markdown is actually contained twice in it, once in pure lowercase and once in the original format. Stuff like that. And the second step is to provide that namespace as the right argument to the process function. You get back the same namespace again. And that is the converted Markdown, is the resulting HTML. Of course, that means it's useful only if you have the requirement to convert just the piece of Markdown into HTML. It's not suitable if you want to create a fully fledged HTML page with HTML tag and body tag and head tag and stuff like that. If you want that, we have to look at the second example, which starts again with a simple piece of Markdown. This time it creates a parameter namespace. This is just an ordinary namespace populated with variables holding default values for the possible settings. We could have a quick look at this by calling the list function and handing that over to the editor so we have a pretty good idea. These are all the defaults. Many of them are obvious. Some of them you would have to look up in the markable documentation. I don't want to go into the details, just to give you an idea. It then sets one parameter, the name of the output file name. The default of the output file name is the input file name, only that the extension is changing from LED to HTML, which means that the new file becomes a sibling of the original Markdown. In other words, when you want to appear that HTML file somewhere else, you have to specify it yourself. So in this case, I asked for the directory for a temporary file name and removed .md from the resulting file name. No, sorry, TMP. I removed TMP from the resulting file name and replaced that extension by HTML5. And then I call the function Markdown to HTML. That will create a fully fledged HTML page ready to be displayed in the browser. Starting with doc type, the HTML tag, the head tag, and so on. It also comes with CSS, as you can see, and you might wonder about this. Of course, this is just a default. You can replace that default by your own CSS by just specifying the name of the CSS file. And then you can do whatever you like. There is also a variable report, which in this case is empty. That may give you some hints. Problems are encountered. Typical examples are the rules how a caption is converted into an anchor are relatively complex. And you might still end up with a problem here when the resulting anchor is found in the same document twice. That's obviously not possible. And Markdown is getting around this by adding a number, a running number at the end of the second one. So if you end up saying with a header three times, the first anchor will be foo, second will be foo1, foo2, third one will be foo3. But in order to tell you, it will be mentioned on the report. Similar things may occur when the number of backticks or double quotes is not even in a single paragraph, which should be the case. Markdown will carry on and deliver something, but you might want to check that. And I'm at the end of my talk. Thank you very much. Any questions? I forgot something to mention. If you want to use Markdown, what should you do? Well, as usual, you go to the APL wiki, although that might change in the future. And as part of the Apple Tree project, which is an open source library, which means you can download and use that for whatever purpose you like. Completely free, no obligations, no license, license agreements, stuff like that. And I'm coming back to you, Colin, in a second. By clicking at Remarkable, you get Remarkable documentation, and that carries links to the project page, which gives you information about the current release, and the download page from where you can download the software. By clicking at Remarkable, it will download it to your machine.
In the future, do you going to put this being part of HTML class in Markdown?
I'm in the process of implementing this, but again, it turned out to be more difficult than I expected. I thought I can do this in a day, and after 2 days I knew this is not going to happen. And because my schedule is really, really full at the moment, it's getting worse in the future. The main reason being that, you know, probably that I'm driving forth behind the regular wiki. And the wiki engine we are using is Moi Moi. And I learned 3 or 4 months ago that Moi Moi is dead. The developers have stopped answering questions that Moi 2.0 is going to be published, meaning there is no 2.0 going to be published. At the moment, that doesn't hurt too much because it's stable. It doesn't cause any problems other than there is no mobile version. But we already get penalized for that, meaning that when you go from a mobile device on it, it looks terrible, first of all, and second, when you search for APL, the APL wiki is not listed on the first page because Google penalizes you when you do not provide a mobile-friendly version. So I need to keep that in mind. And we are discussing currently what the solution to the problem is. And we tend to rewrite the engine without it. Now, think about that, what that means. It's a big problem. We will see. But yes, I'm working on that.
But if you need to see that too.
Any more questions? Michael?
You mentioned you will not support anything animated beyond GIF.
Yes.
Presentable. Why?
It's very difficult to do this.
I thought with HTML5 and CSS.
Well, you can do this, yes, if you have the time. But I'm happy that you volunteered to do it. When I say very difficult, what I mean is I can't do it in a day or so. I'm lacking the knowledge, I'm lacking the time, and I'm lacking actually, you know, I don't need it. If I really would see the point and I would need it, I would probably do it. It's doable, certainly. And if you are good at JavaScript, it's not even a big deal. I'm not. I can read JavaScript, but then I've written JavaScript. I would really struggle to do this in a reasonable amount of time. So I feel if Nikolov would take this on, he probably not a big deal at all. Anybody else volunteering for this? Honestly, I think you are not, right? Because you have to make money yourself as well. It's difficult. It's really difficult. There's only so much time available to do projects you are not getting paid for. Okay, thank you very much.